Good evening and welcome to our webinar, 7 Do's and Don'ts for Couples During Grief. My name is Pat Loader and I'm the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends. Let me just mention before we start that all attendees are muted. To ask a question, you will need to type it in to the question window in your screen's control panel. Our presenter tonight is Shandama Anderson. She is a bereaved mom, a licensed marriage and family therapist. Her experience of having 8 family members die in 5 years led her to become a therapist specializing in couples and grief counseling. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Pat, and welcome to everyone who's out there that I can't see. I just wanted to start by letting you know that being able to survive, let alone thrive as a couple after your child dies, is very, very challenging, and so I want to give you some help tonight with that as much as I can. I very much welcome your questions and hope to get answered anything for you that I can. Try to help you through this time, and there's not a time limit on grieving for a child, so let me know what your questions are. I'm going to move the PowerPoint now. This is me. Took me a lot of years to be able to smile again after my daughter died, so I hope that gives you a little bit of hope for yourself. Okay, so right on to the topic of the night. So I really do want to offer my condolences to all of you. I'm sure if you've been to any of the meetings or the big conferences, you understand that you're in a club and no one wants to be in that club, and we all are, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I'm going to start out with an overview of grief for couples. Then I'm going to talk about just 7 things to know about grief overall. Then I will talk about the 7 do's and the 7 don'ts, and give a few tools, and then a couple of resources at the end. So that's where we're going tonight. Okay, so I'd like you all to think about what your goal is for this talk tonight. But the goal that I want to offer to you while you're grieving is we need to just be emotionally present to one another and bring comfort and bring connection to each other. We're not here to fix each other. You're not there to fix each other in your couple. You don't actually need fixing. You're not broken, you're grieving. And so I think it's really important to understand the difference between fixing and just being there for someone. How do you know when it's time to get some professional grief counseling? And the main way to know, there's 2 of them, and I'll talk about the second one later, but if you feel that you're overburdening family and friends with your grief, then maybe it's time to see somebody professionally. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because you need to talk, and you need to tell your story, and you need to tell your story over and over and over again. And that's the way it works. Time does not actually heal grief, especially when it's the death of a child. And we need help, and we need support. And sometimes we start to worry, oh, I can't talk to so-and-so very much because I've talked to that person too much. And as a couple especially, sometimes just looking at each other can bring the grief back and can be very triggering and upsetting. So just know when it's time to reach out and get some professional help. It doesn't necessarily mean a therapist. You can go to a grief group. Most hospice organizations all across the country offer grief counseling. It's usually free or low fee, even if you did not use their organization at all. They still offer that as a service in the community, so that's a really important place to look for some support. Groups are fabulous for helping with grief, just knowing that you're not in things alone. So it's really true that every couple does have some cracks in their relationship. It's inevitable. We're 2 different people. We come from 2 different families. whatever we grew up with seems normal to us, and so a lot of the misunderstandings between couples just comes because you expect the other person to behave in the way that people do in your family, but this person didn't grow up with you, and they don't have the same normal, and so it causes some problems periodically. Having a child die can definitely increase those gaps temporarily. There's sort of some psychology mumbo-jumbo that I won't go into very much, but there's an understanding about attachment theory and that we need a secure attachment with our partner. And I write a lot about this on my blog, so you can read more about it. But when our child dies, there's a breach in that secure attachment that we have with our partner. And we need time to heal it, and we need to talk through it. And it's normal, and it's natural, and it's just very uncomfortable and difficult. So I want you to try to make a plan, and I'm going to give you some tools tonight to hopefully help make a plan to deal with those gaps and cracks. I think one of the things that's most important to understand is that even though you're in this together, you're in it differently. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Again, because of each family that you came from, you have a way that you're going to respond and react in grief. And it's going to be different, so you're in it together differently. And I think it's just so important to grasp this concept. I want you to try to understand how you grieve, and I'm going to talk about styles of grieving. Figure out your partner's style of grieving, and what I want you to do is to look for what you have in common rather than really focusing on the differences. It's so painful to grieve, and sometimes it's easier to look at our partner and think, he's not grieving right or she's not grieving right. It's easier to look at them and have those thoughts rather than to feel your own grief. So I really am going to encourage you to be looking for what you have in common. So there's the two of you, and then there's this grief, and it's the third entity in your relationship. And you want to be together in the process of dealing with your grief rather than being against each other as you're grieving, which happens. So if you're in that being in a place where you're blaming or not accepting the way the other person's grieving, just know that that happens and see if you can get out of that situation and focus on the fact that there's both of you and there's this horrific grief from your child's death. And if you can at least be in it together, that's one less thing you have to deal with. It's normal for everything in your whole life to be called into question when you're grieving, and especially a child loss. So if you're questioning your friends, your family, your work, your religion, your God, everything comes to be questioned. That's normal. I'm not saying any of these things are comfortable. I'm just saying that they're normal. So try to be easy on yourself as you go through all of this. Okay, styles of grieving. This comes from Ken Doka, and he wrote a wonderful book about this. But there's the intuitive style of griever, and this is the very feeling-based person, the person who cries a lot and wants to talk a lot and process a lot. And some of you are intuitive grievers. Instrumental grievers, these are the people who went out and started the Compassionate Friends. This is a way of doing action to address your grief. The blended griever is the person that can call in the intuitive side, the feelings, the talking, the sadness, the crying, with doing things that honor your child in your life. And that's the blended griever. So instead of saying, oh, this person grieves like, is so emotional and this person is so cold, if you can shift your thinking into intuitive grieving and instrumental grieving, and especially blended grieving, it might give you an opportunity to look at your partner a little bit differently and get out of that so-and-so grieving wrong place and just be with yourself where you are and accept the other person where he. Okay, coping strategies. Because of the family that you grew up in, every one of us grew up in, we have certain coping strategies, and they work for us very, very well as children. And in a certain way, they work for us as adults, but they don't often work very well in a relationship. So, for example, if my coping strategy is to go off by myself and read a book for a few hours and be away, that might not work very well for my partner if he needs me to be present and I'm off in my own world reading a book. Is there anything wrong with going off and reading a book? No, of course not. But what I need to do is to be transparent and name, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling sad, I want to take a break, I'm going to go and read for an hour, and then I'm going to come back and re-engage with you. So that's a coping strategy that I might use. And you each have a coping strategy, and you probably know what it is. And when I was in Costa Mesa giving my talk recently, someone said, are you telling me I can't use my coping strategy anymore? And I want to be really clear. You, of course, can use your coping strategy. You need it. It just doesn't always work very well between you and your partner. So if you need to use your coping strategy that you learned as a child, then you need to come to your partner and say, I'm going to do whatever your coping strategy is, and I'll come back in a little while and re-engage with you. Because people can end up feeling very alone and confused. What happened? I don't know what's going on. And your coping strategies are almost always going to be different, even though there might be some crossover. So I want you to make a list after the webinar tonight. What are my coping strategies? How do they work well for me? How don't they work well in the relationship? Compare your lists of coping strategies. Look and see which things are complementary, which are the ones that cause problems between you, and then create some new experiments. What else might I try? What other coping strategies are available to me? I'm going to have a sip of water. Okay. This is huge, being explicit. I've had several people ask me recently, what do you think are the biggest problems between couples? And I said, they're not explicit. We assume people know what we think, how we feel, what our thoughts and views are. People cannot read your mind. Your partner cannot actually read your mind. If you've been together a short time or you've been together forever, there's a lot of assumptions and they're not usually correct. We can read each other and make some best call, oh, this person's feeling sad now, this person's shutting down now. We can get a pretty good read on things, but we need to be explicit because more misunderstandings happen from this. If some of you who are on the seminar tonight are in the early stages of bereavement, a lot of your interactions right now might be very difficult because there's so much grief and you don't even know what to do with yourself. That's normal. But if you can say, I'm just having a really crappy 10 minutes or hour or day, that's at least making some connection with your partner, letting him or her know, how do you feel, what's going on, if you had a new feeling, if you had a new thought, have you had a new idea, what's going on with you, because your partner really just doesn't know all the time. And you don't want to be in a position of needing to guess while you're in the middle of grieving. So I know it can be hard, and if you didn't grow up in a family where that's a normal thing to do, then this is going to be an awkward thing to add on top of what's already difficult, which is your grief. I know a lot of couples say they don't want to be explicit, it's really uncomfortable, they don't want to share feelings, but when they do, they end up finding that their partner really comes forward toward them rather than moving away, and so they're actually more connected, which is what they want, which is what you want, to feel connected. I know it's hard to have hope after your child dies, but anything you can do to be explicit can help you connect and help you have hope again at some point. Okay. I'm a huge proponent of brain research. We just know so much more now than we used to know. We can change and grow throughout our lifetime, and we can deliberately work on ourselves to change ourselves. If you're interested in some good reading on these topics, you can check out my reading list on my blog. But how you feel now is not always going to be how you feel. And you can change and you can grow, and unfortunately through the death of your child you're sort of forced to, and it's not fair, but it's real. My daughter died in 1998, and so it's been a long time. I have a different view on myself and on my grief than I did then, of course. But I've worked really hard on it too, so just this is to give you a little bit of hope. Okay, so enough on theory. Let me get to things to know about grief. And those of you who have been grieving for a while, you probably know some of these things, and maybe something will be new, but it's okay to be reminded anyway. So first of all, sometimes it's just so overwhelming to grieve that we want to set aside our grief. And I know someone whose both parents and her fiance died while she was a teenager, and she put aside her grief for 50 years. And what I can tell you is, at some point you have to take it out and look at it and work it through. It doesn't go away. It will still be there. And if you choose to not deal with your grief, which I guess you're not because you're here, so I'm probably speaking to the choir, it will stay there and be there and sort of just be underneath everything. So I think that's it on that. Grief begetting old grief. So if you've had other people die in your life and now you're dealing with the child loss, or you're in the middle of dealing with child loss and someone else dies, whether it's a family member or a friend, it's going to well up everything more. It's like a raw wound. And so if you're in a position where it's hard to sort out what's your grief for your child and what's the grief, maybe you've had a parent die, if you're in that middle stage of life where you've got kids and you've got aging parents, your pet who died, whatever it was, if you had a job loss, there was a divorce in the past, all these things are cracked wide open. And it's very hard, but it's normal. So I want you to just keep getting that all these things you're feeling are normal. So your reactions to the death of your child, they are going to differ between you. They're going to differ inside you. They're going to change from day to day. The relationship that you had with your child, how the child died, whether it was a young child, an adult child. There's complicated grief. There's stigmatized grief. So if there was a suicide, a drug addiction, something like that, then those are stigmatized deaths, and it makes it harder to get the support that you need. So just make space for all of you to have your own reactions. A child's death is the hardest because it's out of sequence, and it's just so unbelievable. We just can't really get our hands around it. If you had a difficult relationship with your child who died, that makes this complicated grief. If you were so close and really loving, it's just like having this huge rip in your whole system, in your body, in your heart, in your mind, in your spirit, everything. So just know about this for yourself. Talk to each other about it. Lots and lots of communication with I statements. Here's how I feel. Here's what I think. Here's how I'm seeing this. Here's my experience of this. Here's how I sense this. This is how it sounds to me. And just make room for each other and your own experience. If it's been very long since your child died, you know this, that grief is hidden in our culture, and most people do not want to hear about the death of your child. People are terrified. They don't want to think about it for themselves. We have a very grief-averse culture, and that makes it hard because you have the feelings that you have, and you're allowed to have those feelings. But sometimes it's hard to find a place where it's okay to grieve. And if you've gone back to work, you don't know whether to say anything. People don't know whether to say anything to you. So it just complicates everything. So the early parts of grief is what we call acute grief. This is where there's just intense, overwhelming feelings, thoughts that won't stop, can't sleep, can't eat, crash the car, lose keys, forget what the date is, forget what year it is, really not be in a place where you can focus and be able to do things. That's acute grief. Abiding grief is something that comes much later after you've worked through things, and eventually where you can get to a place where you can remember your child, you can remember good memories, you can have good thoughts and feel okay. I'm not saying you're going to be happy with these thoughts, but there's a way in which we integrate the loss and we figure out, how do I go ahead in my life without my child? What does life mean now? How can I honor my child going forward in my life? During the time of abiding grief, which goes the rest of your life, by the way, there will be times when a tsunami comes along, just a huge wave of grief, and wipes you out again, and that's normal. And that happens periodically in the abiding grief time. So just be patient with yourself, be patient with each other. There's no timeline for this. I wish I could say that there is, and this myth of a year is completely not true. Kids and grief. Okay, so this could be an entire webinar on its own, but if you have other children, they are grieving the loss of their sibling as well as you grieving the loss of your child. The most important thing is just to make space to listen to them, to answer their questions in age-appropriate ways, to do the best you can to be there for them. They need you, they're here. It's just excruciating for the whole family. There's a lot of organizations that have wonderful programs for kids. Compassionate Friends has that. Really make use of these resources. Understand that kids are very different with grief. When they're young, you don't understand what it means. If they get a little bit older, they just are very practical. What does this mean? So we have to explain things in age-appropriate ways. Teenagers, it's very common for them to just be busy in their lives doing other things, but they're going to occasionally ask you a question, probably when you're driving your car, which can be very disconcerting when you're driving and they start asking you questions. So answer in an age-appropriate way. Okay, so I already talked a little bit about stigmatized death. So Compassionate Friends has a lot of resources for these kinds of deaths where they're stigmatized, whether there was a suicide or drug overdose. You still need and deserve all the support in the world if that's your situation. Okay, let's get into the 7 do's. Okay, make time to grieve. Let yourself grieve. Sometimes it's really helpful to set aside a specific time and an amount of time that you're going to grieve. You could make a special altar or a box that you can open up, and maybe there's pictures in there and mementos, things that are really important to you, and spend 30 or 40 minutes just letting yourself be with your grief. And you can either do this with your partner or do this on your own. Then when your time is up, close the box, go out of the room, close the door, give yourself some boundaries around your grief. Make time for it. Okay, so what you need from your partner is support and attunement. And attunement is kind of just a fancy word for care, empathy, support, love, listening, and so on. Daily check-ins is about 20 minutes where you each have 10 minutes to just talk about how you're doing, what you're thinking about, how you're feeling. And the person who's listening, your job is just to listen. It's not to fix, it's not to say things necessarily. Give the shake your head. Really be present with your partner for the check-ins so that there's time where you're able to share what's going on with each of you. Take breaks from grieving. So while it's just as important to make time for grieving, you need some breaks from it. In the very beginning, it's hard to get those breaks because the grief is so overwhelming. But when I say take a break, what I mean is go to a movie, listen to music, go for walks, be in nature, take a bubble bath, see those close friends that you can be around so that if you fall apart all of a sudden that they're okay with that. Whatever your kind of break is, some people like to go running or bicycling, so figure out how to take some breaks because your body actually needs the break too. It's a very exhausting process physically. So try to get a lot of different people into your support system. It's hard when you're grieving to reach out to people, and you kind of want people to reach out to you and do it just right and be just the support that you need. But the truth is, we have to go out and find people who can give us the support that we need. You may have already found this out, but some people are going to really show up for you in a way that you never expected, and some other people that you really thought would be there are not there, and it can be very upsetting. But seek out clergy people, friends, family, support groups, really participate in Compassionate Friends. If you're an introvert, this is a really hard thing to do. So reach out in the few places that you can, and as much as you can, tell people what you need from them because they desperately want to help and they just don't know what to do. If you seek all of your support from your partner, that's pretty tough on each other, partially because you're each grieving and you're in your own process. So definitely grieve with each other and definitely reach out for support from other people. So grief waves, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, I really recommend making a plan ahead of time. Usually for most people it includes spending some of the day with some other people and maybe some of the day just with your family, maybe just alone for some part of it. I know from my own experience and from the many, many people I've worked with that the anticipation of these days is often worse than the actual day itself. So just know that that's normal and be kind to yourself, be kind to each other, just lots of self-care to get through these things. Don't expect yourself to enjoy holidays, birthdays. It's pretty tough, especially once we are getting in toward Thanksgiving and Christmas, and there's all this fake cheer, and it's just everywhere, and it's so much, it's so visible everywhere, and it's earlier and earlier in the year in the store. It just can be very upsetting. So just give yourself time to go in the store, get what you need, try to ignore some of the other things that are really bothering you. So it's really easy to forget to take care of your body when you're grieving. We wear our body out in grief. It's very easy to let your sexual relationship with each other go when you're grieving, and I really want to encourage you to attend to your sexual relationship and to find ways to have physical touch, to hold hands, to have your arms around each other, to hold each other while you sleep, and also to have sex, because that's a need that you both have. The hard part is it's incredibly vulnerable at any time to have sex for most people. And so if you're worried that you're going to suddenly have a grief outburst in the middle of having sex, that might happen. You'll survive it. Talk to each other. Tell each other what's going on. Don't have silent sex. Just make some eye contact. Check in. But I really encourage you to keep having a sex life, even after your child has died. Before I go, let me do 7, and then we'll see if there's some questions. Okay, here's the other time when you need to seek professional support. If your grief turns into depression, what that means is it's been at least a year, maybe longer, since your child died. You are isolating more, you're sleeping more, you're angry more, you think that it's your fault, you have shame, you think I am bad instead of the situation is bad. Those are all signs of depression. Those are not grief. Grief does not need any help. Grief does not need any medication. Sorry about that. I don't recommend taking medication for grief. This is a natural part of life. It's okay. But if you're having signs of depression, then you need to talk to somebody and get some help. Okay, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Here's one that's very much related to what you just talked about, and that is, the question is, my daughter was 27 when she passed away last May. To this day, I have had a hard time being intimate with my husband, thinking she is watching from above. How do I get over this feeling?
Thank you for that question. I think part of it is you just have to let yourself acknowledge that you're worried about that and just say it out loud. I'm really scared about this. I have this weird feeling that maybe she's there watching. You know, everyone has different belief systems about what happens to people after they die, and there's certain ways in which we want our children to be there and looking out for us and looking over us and helping us get through this. Then there's a little bit of privacy issue at that point. So if you really sense that your child, your daughter, is watching, then ask out loud, hey, you know what? I love you so much. This is some private time for me and your dad. It sounds a little crazy, but it's not crazy. Just name it out loud. Does that help?
That's good.
Okay, do you have another question?
I do. It says, my husband and I lost our son in June of this year. He has 2 other children from a prior marriage. Our son was my only child. We are struggling with the fact that he finds comfort in having his other 2 children around. They are not comfortable to me, and I resent it. I have no children other than my deceased son. If possible, could you address the dynamics of such in our marriage?
So, this is a really complicated question. So number one, you're still in the very beginning throes of grief. If your son died in June, only in August. I'm sure it's true that your husband takes comfort in his other kids that were from another relationship, and that you don't. And that's true, and it's kind of scary to admit out loud, but I think it's okay too. Blended families are very, very complicated. They take 7 or 8 years to get all the kinks out in a blended family in a normal situation. It's not surprising that you're not taking comfort from them, and every time you see them you're thinking, how come they get to be here and my son's not here? again, I think a lot of it is just noticing it, admitting it to yourself, try to talk to your husband about it, make a deal with yourself that you're not going to take it out on those kids because it's not their fault, and yet it's excruciating to see. It's normal to be angry, feel jealous, confused. All these things are normal. It's not something that there's a, I can say do this and that will fix it. But I think it's normal that you're not finding comfort there, and it's probably kind of irritating in some ways that your husband is. But at least he has some comfort, and so in that way of finding that common place of what do we have together, if you can take a little bit of comfort in his comfort, that might help. I wish I had a better answer for you.
It's a very good answer. Yeah.
Thank you. You want to have one more question and then
okay.
I'll go on?
I lost my daughter on September 14th, 2011 at the age of 22. My husband now, my husband now was not her father, and he does not understand my grief, and we have had one split already. How do I grieve her and heal, knowing that he does not understand?
Yeah, I have a friend actually who's in the very same situation. Her son died, and her husband is not the father, and I think he's getting really impatient with her, and she's going through a normal grief process. The talk that I'm doing tonight, the title of this talk is actually an article that I wrote, so I would give it to him to read so he could try to understand what's going on. I think it's also okay to say, look, I know this is not your child and you don't understand. What I need from you is be very explicit. What does it sound like? What does it look like? How does it feel? So in other words, you might say, I need you to ask me how I'm doing at least one time per day. I need you to hold me on the couch every night. I need you to say these exact words to me. I love you. This is really hard for you. Whatever it is, figure out what you need so much from him and ask him very specifically and tell him he doesn't have to understand. But he's your partner and this is what you need from him. Okay?
Great. Good answer.
All right. Let me just run through the don'ts pretty quickly. And I'm going to give you some tools, and then we will do a bunch more questions. Okay, don'ts. This one's pretty straightforward. It's very easy to be uncomfortable with grief and try to hand over a Kleenex, and that's one of the quickest ways to shut someone down when they're grieving. No advice, don't fix, we're not broken, we're just grieving. Don't judge his or her style of grief. Talked a lot about this, but when we add judgment on top of grief, now we have one more thing to deal with. That's a crack or a gap you just don't need. So just say to yourself, this is my style, this is his style, this is her style, it's okay. Alcohol and marijuana are depressants, so I would really recommend that you stay away from those. I know a lot of people use alcohol to help them get to sleep at night. I really caution you to be careful with this. I think if you want to have a half a glass of wine or something, that's probably not a problem. If you find that you're drinking or using marijuana or other drugs to mask your grief, then I really want you to seek some professional help. There are a lot of things that you have to take care of right after your child has died, and there's a whole bunch of things you do not have to make any decisions about for as long as you want. So don't be in a hurry to make decisions. Understand that you're going to have different timing. This follows right on the last one. Don't get rid of belongings until you're ready. You might never be ready. You're going to definitely be ready at different times. If your partner wants to hang on to stuff, don't sweat it. It's the small stuff. Let each other take care of things however you need to. I heard recently, and I don't know the name of the group, but there are some people who are taking clothes of children who have died and making them into stuffed animals and making them into blankets. And so it's a way of holding on and letting go of your child's clothes. So that might be something you would want to look into. Probably with each other, you're not erasing your loved one by not talking about her or him. But when you get into larger groups of people, extended family and so on, people don't know what to say, and sometimes they don't talk about your child, and you don't want to erase him or her. Just bring up stories, tell people it's okay to talk, ask them, hey, do you have a memory of my child doing such and such with you? So seek that out. I talked about this a little bit already. So don't worry if you're forgetful, you lack concentration. I can't tell you how long it took me to know what year it was after my daughter died. Not just what the day was or the date was, but I didn't even know what year it was. It's just completely disorienting. So that's uncomfortable but normal. If you're back to work, talk to your boss. I think people around you will be quite understanding. Okay, so here's a few tools, and then I'm going to take questions from here. So the thing I want you to know about attunement, and this will help get you out of trying to fix things and so on, is I statements are, I feel this way, I think this, it sounds like this to me, this is my view, this is my perception of things. Your partner's job is to give attunement. This is when we use you statements. It sounds like you're really sad when we drive by such and such a place that reminds you so much of our daughter. This is the only place I want you using you statements, is when you're giving attunement. Oh, I hear that you thought about our son today and this is what you thought. That must be really hard. Or, I'm really glad to hear that. Okay, so that's what attunement is. It's really listening well. It's not waiting for your turn to talk. It's listening and then just giving back attunement. It doesn't mean you're agreeing, you're disagreeing. You're just listening with your whole body, your mind, your heart, your spirit. Take turns talking and listening. So I want you to imagine that there's a string between your mouths, and there's a washer on the string, like a little metal washer. And when you talk, it pushes the washer toward your partner. And when your partner talks, it pushes the washer toward you. The goal is mostly to have the washer in the middle. And what that means is say something in a short kind of piece, and then check in to get your partner to respond to what you said. A lot of times someone says something and then the other person says something and they didn't actually respond to what was said. Just kind of go around it and go on to the next thing. We need to actually acknowledge what was said. That's part of the attunement. So think about the washer. Sometimes in a couple, one person does more of the talking than the other person. So if you use this washer tool, this will help you even this out a lot better. So both of you get a chance to say what you need to say. Okay, slow down. What does that actually mean? When we are upset, and we can get upset in a 200th of a second, the way the brain has developed, we have 3 parts to our brain. So the first part is the reptilian brain. That's the thing that makes us eat and drink and breathe and sleep. The second brain is our limbic brain, or our emotional brain, and it's the brain that has allowed us to survive as a species. It's the part that makes us go into fight, flight, or freeze. And it happens in a 200th of a second. And so I want you to think about, when I get upset or something bothers me, do I fight, do I flight, or do I freeze? And a lot of the fights that you might be having or the disconnects that you might be having is really just coming out of this limbic brain reaction, this biological reaction to fight, flight, or freeze. So if you can slow everything down, you can give your third brain, your cortical thinking brain, time to come online. And so you don't say the thing that's really hurtful to your partner. When we don't slow down, this is when things get flying back and forth. I call it playing limbic ping pong. And we can have 4 or 5 conversations going all of a sudden out of one comment because it's pinging back and forth so fast. Slow everything down. Okay? Traffic lights. So this is where when you're calm and you're present and you're able to listen and able to respond, able to give attunement, you're green. When you're upset or your partner said something that upset you a little bit, you go to yellow. You might go to red. Red means now your heart rate's over 95 beats. And at that point, you can't actually have a conversation with each other. And somebody needs to say, hey, we need to stop, take 20 minutes apart, because that's how long your body physiologically needs to calm back down and then come back. So someone who's ever able to respond, meaning responsible, says, hey, this isn't going very well. Let's just take a break. I'll meet you back on the couch in 30 minutes. And then you have to come back, because otherwise you end up abandoning each other, and that doesn't help. When you go from green to yellow, you need to say or hold up your hand and say, I'm yellow, or I'm not green anymore. At that point, the really important thing is to stop having the conversation of the content. So I don't know what the content might be of the conversation, but what are we going to do on Saturday? If you've gone to yellow, you need to stop talking about what's happening on Saturday and ask each other, what just happened here? Well, I got triggered. I had this thought. I had this feeling. When you said X, Y, or Z, I felt a certain way. So we have our own stories about what things mean and what's going on, and when we get triggered and we're not green anymore, we're not actually listening to our partner. So if you're not green, you need to say, I'm yellow or I'm red, and you need to talk about what happened until you're both back to green. So you need to take deep breaths, deep belly breaths. You can practice making eye contact and synchronizing your breathing to help you get back to green. But give each other the benefit of the doubt that whatever just happened, your partner did not actually intend to hurt your feelings or upset you, but something did upset you. Another tool that's extremely important, which I don't have written down here, is about intention and impact. And whenever we say something, we have an intention, but the impact on the other person is often very different than our intention. And so if you're in a conversation and now you're yellow, you might say, hey, I'm curious to know what your intention was, because the impact on me was that hurt my feelings, or I felt shut down, or I don't feel heard. Intention, impact come from different families, so things are going to be different. Okay. When we're grieving, as you probably all know, you're exhausted. It's easy to get irritable and defensive. If you get defensive, just breathe through it. It's a wave. It will rise up. It will come back down. Try to not talk while you're defensive. This is part of slowing down. When we're defensive and we talk, things just spin out of control quickly. So if you can say, I'm feeling defensive, I'm just going to breathe through it. If you can't, then just be quiet. I don't know of anything more exhausting and difficult than grieving the death of your child. And I've seen a lot of things. So give yourself credit, give yourself breaks, make sure you sleep. If you're having trouble sleeping, go see your doctor, get checkups, exercise, eat well, drink a lot of water. You have to take care of yourself to get through this. Okay, here's the great news. So the Compassionate Friends research has shown that only 9% of couples who've had a child die get divorced. 9%. That's phenomenal. I'm giving you some tools that hopefully will help you deal with the cracks that you have in your relationship so that you're not one of the 9% that gets the divorce. So take hope from this. This is really fabulous. And thank goodness they did their research. Okay, so a few resources. Obviously, the Compassionate Friends. My couples blog is free. I write almost every week. The URL is here. The little image that you see on the screen is the book that I wrote 2 years ago. It's a memoir and resource guide for grieving parents. There's lots of good books. I know Compassionate Friends has a library. Reach out to the hospice organizations wherever you live. There's a lot of grief resources out there online and in the real world as well. Okay, so let's take some more questions.
Okay. This question is from Tom. My wife and I lost our daughter at birth. We have no memories, never heard her cry, talk, or walk. I find it very hard to attend functions with newborns, even 2.5 years later. I fear saying the wrong thing or making the new parents uncomfortable. How do I deal with this? It creates problems in our relationship. My wife doesn't have the same difficulty.
Well, that's what I can personally relate to. Sometimes it's a good idea to create some kind of a, I don't know, like a little altar for your baby, to put some kind of a marker in your yard, or have a brick with her name on it somewhere important to you, or on a bench. Find some tangible way to have a marker of her who you never got to know. I know some people who, get a bracelet or a ring or, something to wear around their neck that's engraved with the baby's name on it. I think what you're describing is so normal to have these feelings and these upsets, and I think you just have to honor it. Just say, you know what, this is really uncomfortable for me. I wish I didn't feel this way, but I feel this way. And just let yourself feel this as long as it lasts. Ask your wife to be patient with you. You don't have any control over it. There's nothing wrong with you that you're upset and that you have a hard time being around newborns. Avoid them if you can. That's okay. Let yourself have your feelings. The more you let yourself have your feelings, the more they will settle down. So feelings are road signs. They let us know we need to attend to something. And when we try to push those away, they get bigger and louder. Just like when you're driving, if it says curbs ahead or yield, you don't park your car there, but it lets you know you need to do something. And feelings are just like that. So name those feelings to yourself. Hopefully your wife will be open to you letting her know. If you need to leave, you can leave. She can stay. Try some experiments, see what works for you. But I have to say that's really normal.
Okay. Here's another question. Our son died 14 months ago. I am struggling with finding a way to refocus my life, to live in a way that truly honors our son. Any suggestions?
Well, that's such a fabulous question. Write a list of all the things that made your son your son. What was it about him exactly that was so special? And then see if you can find some things that honor the ways that he was special. I don't know how old he was. If he was into sports, if he was into writing, if he was into fantasy, if he had, whatever his activities were, if you can find some way to honor him in that arena, that might give you the most satisfaction. I think it takes a long, long time after your child dies to face this question of meaning of your own life and figure out what to do. When my daughter died, I worked in high tech, and it took me a long time to figure out that I wanted to be a therapist and work with grieving people and work with grieving couples. So be patient with yourself. Notice what you're even a little bit interested in and explore those things.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. This one is, I'm worried about my younger daughter who has had a hard time finishing school as her older sister was killed in a tragic car accident right before her wedding almost 2 years ago. Her fiancé is now engaged again and has moved on. She is very quiet and has not expressed her grief and feels very lost.
Well, that sounds really hard. I might actually recommend doing a little bit of family therapy. A family therapist is very skilled at getting each person in the family to come out and talk, invite everybody into the discussion. I don't think trying to force your child to talk on your own is going to help. It's probably very hard to understand how her fiancé was able to go on. As a sibling, it's a different loss than a child loss, and so if you have an organization nearby or Compassionate Friends is nearby and you can get her in with other, I don't know how old your remaining daughter is, but to get her in with other kids who have a sibling loss can be a really great way to make space. Part of it is just to let her know that you're there, that you love her if she ever wants to talk about it or has questions. Don't hesitate to talk about your other daughter, the one who died, in front of her, because that tells her that that's allowed in your family to talk about it. But if it's been a couple years, I think going to family therapy would be good. I wouldn't put her in therapy on her own because there's nothing wrong with her. It's a family system, a family setup, and she needs the family.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this has been a great webinar. Thank you. I really appreciate it. For our audience, I would like you to know that our webinars are recorded and posted on the Compassionate Friends website, www.compassionatefriends.org. Check the Compassionate Friends website for the subject and date of our next webinar. You can visit TCF on the Compassionate Friends webinar or website where you can find local chapters and also link to our Facebook and Twitter pages. Again, many, many thanks to our presenter and good night to everyone.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.